Runescape. This game is special. To many of us, it represents the first jump into the MMO universe, where real people walked side by side. To others, it was your first lesson in pain, as people's true nature started to show, especially when there was something to gain. Theft, scamming, murder, they all reared their ugly heads, and to thousands of players it became an addiction. Accruing skill points, collecting gear, and strengthening those friendships. It was about feeding your inner loot seeker. This game, while not the first MMORPG, was one of the first to let us in for free. Games back then liked to tread the waters of alpha and beta stages to lure in players as it prepared for a retail release. Many never ventured far beyond those stages, but you can bet RuneScape was one of them. At some recent point, RuneScape had 3 versions of this game running: Classic, Old School, and its newer iteration, plainly RuneScape 3. This game was another favorite of mine in my middle school years. I had played it when it was first released in 2001, and ran on a browser and through a website run by Jagex, which featured a ton of other games. I remember quite a few of them, though it seems there's no way to go back and play them, which is a shame. There was a Pokemon pet ripoff game, a crypt walking game, space chess, and other crazy various ways to let off some steam. But RuneScape was the main course. Many of my friends and I, when we were in middle school, would rush down to the computer lab to play whenever we got our chance. My name's Basil, and let's go back and revisit some of the good old days of RuneScape. I will be reviewing the original classic version, not to be confused with the old school version. Jagex recently made the decision to take down their classic servers despite their popularity, and for some reason, people who did not previously have accounts in the classic servers could not generate new accounts anyways. From what I understand, this was to prevent cheaters and hackers from taking advantage of old, outdated programming structures within the game, so you were not permitted to join in on the fun. However, despite all the efforts of Jagex to put the classic version to rest, many private and custom servers have come out of the woodworks to replace it. I've had the privilege of playing on the RuneScape Classic Emulator server, RSCE for short. It's a whirlwind of emotions logging back on for the first time in nearly 16 years. I was just a kid whenever I used to run around in this MS Paint inspired world. I say that with affection because even at the time in 2001, RuneScape did not look very good, and it still doesn't look particularly great, and it's definitely aged. The way you move around is simply by clicking. In fact, 99% of the movement and actions in this game are entirely click-based. You click, your character does stuff. Bam, that's the game. And while it doesn't look as flashy or as exciting compared to today's gaming, it's still decent and a fun experience. And to be fair, clicking, attacking, and waiting is really all you do in most MMORPGs anyways. Take away some of the skill rotations from other MMOs and this is what you'd be doing. But this game's claim to fame doesn't come from its combat engine. Obviously, it's gotten some accolades over the past 2 decades from the pure fact that it was one of the first. That much I can admit. But as I played through the game recently, I remembered that this game pushed the limits of what people could achieve in a virtual world through leveling up your skills. It was a game about bragging. It was a game about being on the top. Did you have a 99 skill in every single category? No, well, then you were a noob, at least in some people's eyes. Seriously, the skills in this game were a lot of fun when I first discovered it all. I can remember mining at the barbarian village for the first time, all of the fishermen trying to gather as many lobster as possible at Karamja, and even slaying as many chickens as possible to get feathers for fletching. So many of us were just trying to rake in supplies for gold. It was a madhouse. Most instances of farming for resources are symbolized by the object you're currently using above your head, and you are notified of skill increases in the text below. The server I'm currently playing has some sort of expedited EXP process where very few actions will cause level ups, something that I'm not particularly used to, but hey, that's okay. Genuine servers would be super slow and cumbersome. In fact, this server has a lot of events that run throughout the week, from PvP events, parties, and Skill Island, so it seems to be having a positive impact on the game that keeps things exciting and moving. There are pros and cons to these kinds of events, and while some of them are indeed exciting, the acceleration to endgame is questionable, which I suppose that's why people are playing to begin with. Sort of along the lines of private WoW servers, which many of them feature either immediate capped characters with low-level loot or accelerated levels to get people to where most of the fun is. However, I am a firm believer that a lot of the legitimacy of endgame content comes from hard work that MMORPGs typically featured when they were first coming out. Accomplishment is the name of the game when it comes to MMOs of the past, so it's sort of missing that deeper element that I've spoken about in my previous MMORPG videos. The lore of this game is very loose and did not follow a strict and traditional storytelling method, and while quests can help you better understand the world, there are, for example, but small and brief mentions of gods that govern the world of Runescape. For example, you can find temples and underground areas dedicated to the god of chaos, Samarak, in the wilderness. In other instances, you are able to find items through quests that represent the gods, such as the Staff of Armadil. It's not exactly a major quest, and the item is even relatively weak, but it provided us with lore. RuneScape takes place in Galenor, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and while it isn't super apparent immediately, many of the citizens of the world dispute its origins, arguing which of the many gods created and allowed the various races to inhabit it. The various locations of the game are fun to see, yet unfortunately, as I said before, the game has aged. You can see this as you traverse many of the settings. Many three-dimensional objects are just out of place or just no longer look good, along with many of the two-dimensional characters that move around in the world. Funny enough, I don't think the game was meant for full screen, as you can expand the window to fit nearly any monitor. In my case, even a 1080p monitor stretches out and warps many of the enemies and NPCs within the world. It actually looks pretty funny. Traveling through the world takes a very long time, so at this point you have access to spells and portals that will transport you from point to point, so long as you have the runes and money to do so. I don't really remember this whenever I played the game. This makes the game's world feel a bit more fair, because let's be honest, the game's movement is pretty horrific at this point. The pathing is frustrating, slow, and inaccurate. I'm sure many of the RuneScape Classic fans and players have no trouble with it, but I still find it rather annoying. You can actually use the minimap to move to areas, but again, it just doesn't feel right, not even to the standards of an early 2000s MMORPG. Let's move on from the clunky movement to the most integral part of an MMORPG, the combat. Now, I'm going to continue being brutally honest here. It's super simple and really not that interactive. There are nuances on how to improve your chances of beating tough monsters and other players. After clicking on a character or enemy, you enter a turn-based combat system where your damage taken and given are displayed periodically. Your damage taken and given are determined by your armor and weapons, obviously, but is also affected primarily by your combat stats. You can actually change some of your stats while fighting. You can use controlled, aggressive, accurate, and defensive mode. Each one of these modes alter your combat skills slightly depending on who you're fighting. You can also use magic and prayer to change some of your stats as well. There's also archery, which plays a pivotal role in chasing down people who are currently fleeing. It's not the most complicated combat system in the world, but at the same time, in the early millennium, it was all we had. That is, at least until Magic and Prayer was introduced, which featured a deeper rune system and point expenditure system. Even gathering the runes and bones are still fun today. Definitely a highlight when you're playing through this game. I love seeing all the various spells and bonuses that you can get from Magic and Prayer. The MMO world was at its frontier and everything was new, including murdering each other, otherwise known as PKing at the time. In fact, before the wilderness, you were able to kill anyone, anywhere. It was actually super fun. My good friend, from which I've told some stories about, Dark Shadow and Dranzig, otherwise known as Yogs and Hilbrith, took on the personality of Harry Mo. Yes, seriously. A pale, red-headed, bearded, axe-wielding maniac that scammed people for all that they owned, then proceeded to kill them. Yes, again, my bud could not resist his antics and take out all of his mischief on these games. We used to lure people up into the second floors of buildings where there were no guards and straight up kill them, stating that we'd give them adamantite or rune armor if they followed us. We were bad children. Anyways, I have to reiterate that this game was no exception to the brutal rules of MMORPGs of the past. Getting killed meant that you dropped a lot of your gear and inventory. It wasn't a good feeling to get attacked randomly, and it was hard to flee in this game considering how difficult it is to move around, and you're not even immediately allowed to flee any fight for the first 3 rounds of combat. So chances are, if you were outmatched, you were going to take a lot of damage, and you were probably going to die. And on top of this, if the player chasing you, as I stated before, was skilled in archery, you were definitely going to die. The wilderness was the remedy to this situation where you could only attack people the deeper you went in, depending on the difference in level. The further you went in, the more loot and opportunities that presented themselves. I get why they put this in the game, but this was about the time when I decided I was going to quit the game. I was very frustrated that Harry Mo and I couldn't run our scam murder plots anymore. The wilderness is, in hindsight, an actually pretty fun idea. At lower levels of the wilderness, there's less danger as you'll only be attacked by people near your level, so it's not like you're going to get blindsided by a level 100. However, if you want some crazy loot and spoils, whether it's mining or taking down some dangerous enemies, the level disparity in which people could attack you grows as you venture further into the wilderness. In any case, one of my favorite things about this game are the items. It was a blast to collect the right items for crafting, and many of the items from creating pies to potions and many armors and weapons required a vast array of supplies. For example, you were required to gather feathers by the hundreds and even thousands if you wanted to create arrows, even for the highest level arrows along with whatever metal you needed. More importantly, this progressional and well thought out way of obtaining items was satisfying. The progression from bronze to iron, steel, mithril, adamantite, and then to rune armor is just classic gaming at its finest. Of course, you could get drops from killing high level creatures, which is always thrilling. I managed to utilize the Skill Island event on the RSCE server to hunt some higher level creatures and immediately got some nice loot, even half a dragon shield. Makes me wonder if I'm just lucky or if the drop chances were buffed. The server itself is certainly popular and always manages to have a lot of people online, which is great for anybody who wants to join in on the fun. The server itself has some strange traditions from what I can see, and I'm not exactly sure how they even developed. They're certainly interesting nonetheless. A lot of the players have level 61 duels and cap at that level to have even and consistent fights. It tends to bring in a lot of participation and people go nuts at any event involving this. I guess the stakes can be high sometimes. Not to mention that there are other variations within the level limitations, even going as far to simply have level 3 boxing. I hope I'm putting this all out there correctly. Wrap your head around that. But seriously, even something as simple as hide and seek or scavenger hunts bring some intense fun to the game. Another positive note is that the GMs and player base of the server are extremely helpful. At first I wandered around the world of Runescape and had no idea where to even begin. Considering you're placed at Edgeville instead of the starting area of the game, which I was used to, I didn't know what to do. I actually meagerly walked around picking up random objects and selling them until I managed to get a set of gear and farm up some experience. Of course, high level players and GMs found me before I could even grind out more experience and get past the beginning and mid levels. So they gave me some pointers. Trust me folks, it's been a long time since I played RuneScape. Funny enough, as many of you would appreciate this, I would have really liked the authentic experience, but in the end, I still enjoyed the expedited process and it pushed me into areas that I would have probably never seen. To be honest, I can even go ahead and experience that just by starting another character over and traveling throughout the world in a vanilla way if I wanted to, as the server offers that experience still. Anyways, they are all very generous. Shouts out to everyone that helped me. I know that there's so much more to talk about. The endless amounts of quests, the places to explore, the areas to farm, the deep dungeons to grind EXP and loot. This game was one of the first to feature all of these things wrapped up in an MMORPG bow, something that was just not available at the early millennium. Top it all off with the dramatic interactions with other players, all for the price tag of nothing, and you've got yourself a recipe for success. I have my issues with this game, but I have issues with every game. So if you're looking for that nostalgic trip down memory lane, RSCE has your back. Go check them out in the link I provided and tell them that Basil from the Retro Bros sent you. I'm Basil, checking out. The Super Retro Bros have a lot more content coming your way, so until next time, thanks for watching.